Hello and welcome everyone to another episode of Advanced React WordPress theme development. In the previous episode, we created a search form. We added the search input field. In this video, we're going to continue with our search functionality. Now we're going to add a button below this. Okay. So just below this one, we're going to create an input field. Type equals submit. Let's break it into multiple lines. Value equals search, and then on click, so we can say handle search form submit, and class name, I'll just add some of the classes for styling. I'm not explaining the styles to you because this is not a CSS course. I'm assuming that writing CSS would be pretty simple and you can use the Tailwind classes to write them. Okay, perfect. So now we've got the search form. You can see that you've got the search functionality here. So you've got the search form here. I can type anything over here. All right. So let's continue further. So the next thing we want to do is basically write a search query, and I'm going to show you that. So if you go to GraphQL IDE, okay, and you can do a query called posts. You can get the first 10 or first 9 posts, and then you can use the after null, which is going to actually contain the value for your cursor. So after 10 posts, you're going to get the next 10 posts, and so on and so forth. Then you have the where clause, where you can pass the value of your query under the search key, and then you can get the details like the ID, title, excerpt, slug. You can get the cursor value. You have the page info, all of that information. Okay, so you can see that you've got the cursor value here. That's what you need to pass the next time when you do the load more, okay, which I've already explained in the load more tutorial, so I won't be going over with you on that. You can watch that tutorial. I've explained that in detail. And then this tells you if it has the next page or not, what's the end cursor value. All right, awesome. So let's continue. So I will need to use this query. So what I'm going to do is I'll go over to source and then queries, and under queries I'm going to create a directory called search, and inside of search I will create a file called get search results. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and paste the query. You can grab it from the code from the repository, but I'll just paste the code here. And you can go on to GitHub. You can go to feature YouTube. You can go to feature YouTube tutorial, and then you can go to front end, and then source, and then queries, and you can get all of the queries and all of the code from there. All right. So let's continue. So I have pasted the query over here. This basically is the same query as I've added over here, which is this one. Except that it takes dynamic values on top. As you can see, it takes first, after, and the query string as well. We need to create a post fragment because we're going to be using the same set of data over and over again. So it's better to create a fragment. So let's do that. I'm going to go inside of the fragments, and I'm going to create a directory called post. And inside of that, we'll create a file called index.js. Okay, and we'll say const. And then I'm just going to copy an example, paste it here, and just change it to post fragment. Okay, and the type for the fragment will be post, and the value for that will be ID, title, excerpt, slug, featured image, node, and then image fragment as well, right? And if you go back over here, I'm already passing the image fragment, so it's fine. And I'm pulling the post fragment from that file. Okay. Now, I'm creating another query which is basically the same thing, except this has an extra information called offset pagination. You must be wondering, why do we need this? And why do we need to create two queries where both are the same except this separate variable? So the reason for this is because onto the search page that we're looking at, we want to be able to see how many results are available. Is it 10 posts, just 0 posts, or how many posts are there? And in order for us to grab that, I need to get that information from offset pagination total. So that's the total number of result. So if I go ahead and pass that information here, just spreadify it and hit it, let's say hi, I'm going to change that to hi, and there you go. Let's scroll down. You can see that a total number of 51. So the count is 51. That's the total number of records, which means that's the total number of posts that are available as a result for this query that contains hi, right? So we're going to need to do this only once, the first time the user types the query and hits submit. We don't want to be doing it every time you hit the load more, because calculating the total number of pages or total number of records from the database is certainly expensive. So you want to be able to avoid that as much as possible. Now, initially on the first query, we definitely want to know how many records are there. But every time you hit load more, we don't want to know what's the total number of record, because load more is going to be based on the end cursor. So if you get the 10 post, you're going to get the fresh end cursor every time. The value of that will be available to you over here, and then using that cursor you can get the next 10 set of posts, and this continues until there are no set of records available. Okay, so that's the reason we are separating it in two queries, so that the first time the user hits submit, we use this one with the total number of pages, and then for every load more we use this one. All right, so I hope that is clear. So next up, so we go back to our search page, and there are a bunch of things we want to do. So we want to create certain states. So we'll say const this, we need to handle errors. So we'll say search error set search error equals useState, and the value can be empty to begin with. Then for query results posts, set query results result post. So this will contain the query result. So once we receive the response, we're going to use this query results post. We're going to use the set query result post to set that data. This should actually be posts. Yep. And then we also need to create another state, and we also need to manage show result info. So we'll do result info set show result info equals useState. Now initially this will be false. So why this is needed is because let's say user has entered some information here, or the query over here, and hit search. That's the time you want to show how many results are found. We don't want to be showing it every time, so we're going to be managing that with this state, show result info. Okay, so that's that. And then now we're going to do a query. So I'm going to write const fetch posts. You can name it whatever you want. I'm going with fetch posts. You're going to get loading, and I'm going to use the lazy query. The reason I'm using the lazy query of Apollo, so it's a hook, is because we don't want to just call this every time the component renders. We want to call it once the form is submitted, once the user has finished typing and hits submit or hits enter. All right, that's why we're using the lazy query. So it's not going to keep getting called unless you call the fetch posts. Then till that time the query will not be made. Okay, so this is the place we want the get search results with total pages. So this is the query. Okay, so we're passing the query, and then the second parameter will be we can pass notify network stand status change. I'm going to set that to true. And then on completed, once the promise is resolved, once we've received the data, okay, then we do something. And then we also handle the error. So on error, say error and comma, and this is going to be used as set error GraphQL errors. Okay, so this is going to set the error. But if we have got the data, then I want to do two things. First, I want to set the data inside of the query results post, which is this one, right? So I'll say data and then comma posts. Why I'm saying that is because, remember, if you take a look, it's data.posts, right? So I'm going to pass that and question mark. If that is not available, pass a fallback as an object, because this is an object, post is an object. All right, and then the second thing I'll do is say set show result info to true, because that's the time query is complete, we've got the data, and we want to be able to show the result to the user over here, right? Okay, so our query is ready. Now we basically need to call this fetch post. So when do we call it? Okay, the first thing we're going to do is we'll set the show result info to false. So if it was previously set to true, you want to be able to set it to false. And then when this function is called, it's going to set it to true. Okay. So then if search query is empty, which is this one, if this is empty, so I'm going to say, oops, I'm going to say is empty. Let's pull is empty on top. Import is empty from Lodash. Okay, so if it is empty, which means that user hasn't really typed anything and user is trying to submit the form here. In that case, we don't really want to make a request. We don't want to call this fetch post and make a request. At that point, we want to set some errors, right? So we already have the set search error function, and this function is going to take some text, say please enter text to search, right? And then we'll set the query result post to an object, empty object, because if user hasn't typed anything, then I don't want to really show anything over here, right? Okay, and then I'm gonna say return null, so I don't want to continue. But if that's not the case, then we'll set the search error to empty, which means there's no error, we all good. And then I'm gonna call the fetch post, and this is going to take options, and this option will contain variables. This variable will be first. So take a look what this query wants. The query expects us to, let's have a look. So the query expects first, so I'm going to pass that. So first will be per page first. Remember, we created a constant so that we can manage that throughout the site. So we already have that set to 9. So I'm going to use that. And then after, because the next set of information it asks for, next set of parameter it asks for is after. So after will be null initially. And then it's also going to ask you for the query, right? Which is this one. So let's do query. And then I'm going to pass search query over here. So which is what we have here, which is being changed when the user types something, right? Okay, so we've got this handle form submit. working fine. And the next thing I'm going to do is basically have the results. So if you remember from my previous episodes, we already have a load more component, right? So if you go to blocks, I think it's inside of news, we have load more posts, right? So this component is already available, and job of this is basically to take the posts and also render the result and make a query to get the load more posts, right? So we are pretty smart people, and we like to use the dry rule, which is do not repeat yourself. And I don't want to be ending up building the same functionality again if I already built it, right? So all I'm going to do is I'm going to use the load more posts component over here pretty smartly. Okay, and I'm going to say load more posts. And what is it expecting? It is expecting us to give it posts, right? And look at the shape of the post. It requires post dot, so it needs to have the edges inside of it. It needs to have page info. And if you remember the code, we already have the post dot edges. We have the page info available as well, right? Which is awesome. So it's exactly the shape that we want. And if you remember the query that we were making, which is get load more news, that is also exactly the same, except that it has the search query has an extra parameter called query, right? While we are in here, I think this can be extracted into the fragment that we created. So let me just remove this post fragment, and I'm going to use that here, post fragment. There you go. And I think because the image fragment is being used inside of the post fragment, we should rather move it there, right? Okay, so I'm going to remove this from here, and I'm going to go over to all of the places where it's been used, remove the image fragment from here, remove it from here as well, and then finally go to the post fragment and add it there, because that's where exactly it's being used, right? So it doesn't make sense to include it elsewhere. Import image fragment from image, which is perfect. Okay, great. So we've got the load more news being fixed. We've got the post fragment, and it looks much neat, and it looks better now. Okay. All right, coming back. So load more posts expects us to give it posts. That's what we're going to do. So remember that when this query is called, when fetch post is called, it's going to set the query result post as data.post, which will be exactly the shape we want. We want the edges. So this will already be available. So I'm just going to use this value. So where is it? This is the query result post. So I'm going to just pass that to my load more post. I'll say posts and then query result post. Perfect. And then the next thing we're going to do is basically also add the classes to it, so it looks slightly neater. So I'm going to add some classes to the load more post. Name equals this. Okay. And okay, the next thing we want to do is we want to improvise our load more post component. Now the thing is that, as you can see, that this load more component takes posts, and initially it sets that against the post data, right? The problem is that if you refresh, initially the post is going to be empty. Why? Because if you take a look, post is nothing but query result post, and that is an empty object, right? So even if the user types something and searches it, nothing's going to happen. Why? Because initially it set that value, right? It set that value initially as empty, and now it's not going to change. The component is not going to get re-rendered because this job is done. So in order for us to make sure that it does its job, what we need to do is we need to take the benefit of the use effect. We'll say use effect and import it from React. And then inside of this, we'll take a dependency as posts.edges. So we're saying that anytime the post.edges changes, go ahead and set the post data to the new one, which is post.edges, right? So we'll do that. And apart from that, also set the page info. So this is going to be post.pageinfo. All right, so now if we go back and check, and if I say hi over here, and if I hit enter, there you go, congratulations. You've got your post being rendered. Of course, it doesn't look that great. The reason for this is because we have passed the class from the component, which is this one, but we haven't really passed this class name attribute. In fact, this should be classes, not class name, right? So we need to improvise our component. We need to pass classes over here, right? And then at the same time, we go down at the bottom and give it a div, and we'll give it class name, and then you need to pass it classes. And now if you go and check, there you go, congratulations. It's looking all beautiful with the load more, okay? So now the problem is that if you hit load more under this load more posts, right, it's going to call the load more news, but that's not what we want, right? What we really want is it should call our query, which is get the news results. So if you take a look, we have a query called get search results. We want this to call, we want it to call this one. So when you are on the search page, I want it to call this one and not get load more news. And at the same time, I want it to dynamically change the value in case if the user is on the search page, then we should be able to pass the query as well, not just first and after, because remember that that's what it's expecting. It's expecting us to pass the query as well, right? So how do we solve that? Well, I'll keep that for the next episode. I would like you guys to think how to solve that problem. Please do make comments. How do we solve this problem? And then in the next video, I'm going to go over discussing how do we attack this problem and how do we solve it. All right. So I hope you did like the video. If you did, please give a thumbs up and do subscribe to my channel if you aren't already. Do star my repository. My repository name is Next.js Headless WordPress, and give star to my repository like all the other beautiful 145 people have. And do follow me on GitHub. My GitHub handle is imranhsayed, and follow me on Twitter. My Twitter handle is CodyTech. All right. So I'm going to see you in the next video. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.